I sacrificed my entire life savings to support my grown daughter's dreams, only for her to take her cheating mother's side. My wife's affair partner promised her a life of luxury during our divorce, calling me a failure. A year later, after zero contact, my daughter stood on my doorstep, claiming she'd been used and wanted a second chance. But oh, did I laugh. I'd already told her this a year ago. My ex-wife, Mia, and I had been married for 25 years. We were, by all accounts, happily so, until one night she abruptly announced she wanted a divorce. I was completely blindsided. There were absolutely no warning signs. She coldly stated she no longer loved me, found me unattractive, and showed no hint of regret or emotion. I pleaded with her, asking if there was someone else, if she'd met someone new, hoping we could somehow work through it. But she just refused, insisting she despised my appearance and implied I wasn't the man she'd originally fallen for. Her words were excruciating, slicing deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. And in a way, I couldn't entirely dispute her. I knew I'd neglected myself over the years. When Mia and I first met, I was at my absolute peak. I was a star basketball player in college, incredibly dedicated to my fitness. My body was my temple, and I relentlessly pushed myself to stay in top physical condition. I had plenty of admirers back then, but everything shifted when Mia came into my life. After we married and welcomed our daughter, Jane, who is now 24, the realities of family life settled in. Mia had always dreamed of being a homemaker, which meant the financial burden fell squarely on me. I started taking extra shifts just to keep us afloat. For the past 25 years, my job became my absolute priority. No matter how drained or unwell I felt, I showed up to the office, day in and day out. I never took sick days. I never allowed myself a real break. My sole focus was ensuring Mia and Jane had everything they needed. Their happiness and comfort always came first. Somewhere along the way, I completely stopped prioritizing myself. I no longer resembled the fit person I once was, and it stung deeply that my ex was supposedly leaving me for that very reason. But I knew there had to be more to her sudden desire for divorce. It just didn't add up. So, later that week, I acted on my suspicions and hired a private investigator. A co-worker who'd been through a similar heartbreak had recommended him, and I was desperate for answers Mia clearly wouldn't willingly provide. It didn't take long for the investigator to uncover the truth. Mia was indeed cheating. She had been consistently meeting a man named George. The PI supplied photos, undeniable proof that she was seeing him regularly throughout the day. I did some digging of my own and quickly found George on social media. As soon as I saw his pictures, I knew. George came from a significantly wealthier background than me. He possessed the kind of money and lifestyle I could never hope to provide. This was the real reason she was leaving. It wasn't about my appearance or my physical decline. She had simply found someone else, someone she believed could offer her more. He could give her all the things I had spent 25 arduous years trying so hard to provide, but never quite managed. All my efforts, all my sacrifices over those years, felt utterly meaningless now that she'd found someone with a fatter bank account. While the private investigator continued gathering details, I wanted my own definitive proof. One night, after Mia had fallen asleep, I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, capturing screenshots of conversations that confirmed my worst fears. The texts between her and George were graphic and deeply disturbing. My ex-wife had explicitly told him how much she'd grown to hate me, how she disliked being seen with me. Mia had even expressed wishing she could have left me sooner, but couldn't, she said, until she found someone else. I felt I had all the evidence I needed for the divorce, but then, a week later, the investigator sent new photos and information that completely floored me. He revealed that my daughter, Jane, was aware of her mother's affair and regularly met up with George. The pictures showed Jane looking happy and relaxed in his company, leading me to suspect the affair had been ongoing for quite some time. Clearly, I had been utterly naive. Both my ex-wife and daughter were complicit. I was staggered. Had they planned to continue their deception, only revealing the truth once they felt secure in their new arrangement? To provide some crucial context, just before Mia declared she wanted a divorce, I had made a massive financial decision, one that at the time felt absolutely right for a father to make. My daughter, Jane, had always dreamed of owning a home, something she'd talked about for as long as I could remember. It was her ultimate goal to have a place she could truly call her own and she had been diligently saving for it over the years. Every conversation, she'd update me on her house hunt, searching for properties within her budget, and it was clear how much this meant to her. A few months before Mia's divorce announcement, Jane finally found the perfect house. It was everything she'd hoped for. But there was one significant problem. It was considerably out of her price range, requiring an additional couple of $100,000. Jane came to me, practically begging for assistance. She asked if I could provide the difference. Honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. She was asking for my entire life savings, the money I'd painstakingly put aside over the years for emergencies and retirement. But I loved my daughter more than anything, and I couldn't bear the thought of her losing out on her dream due to money. After much deliberation, I decided to give her everything I had saved. I reasoned that such sacrifices are part of being a parent. My own parents had helped me buy my first house and had spent countless nights assisting us when Jane was born. They had sacrificed without ever asking for anything in return. It felt right to do the same for my only child. I wanted Jane to be happy, convinced this house was the key. When I handed over my life savings, I asked her not only to use it for the purchase, but also to allocate a portion for renovations, as it was an older property needing substantial work. I didn't want her to be house rich, but cash poor, struggling to maintain a home she couldn't afford to fix. I also thought the extra funds would provide a safety net. At the time, I convinced myself it was just money and I could always earn more. I knew I'd be working for the foreseeable future, so I figured I'd eventually rebuild my savings. What mattered most was seeing Jane's dream come true. My daughter was absolutely ecstatic when she finally got the keys, crying in my arms and thanking me profusely. This, then, was precisely why I was so utterly shocked to discover Jane had been willingly meeting with George behind my back, all while knowing about her mother's ongoing affair. Of course, after uncovering everything, the affair, the deceit, I couldn't stay silent. I confronted both Mia and Jane, informing them there was no longer any point in hiding or lying, as I knew the entire truth. Mia's initial reaction wasn't guilt or remorse. It was furious anger. She was incensed that I had hired a private investigator to follow her, as if I were the one in the wrong. But I wasn't having it. I told her if anyone had a right to be furious, it was me. She had been sleeping with another man behind my back, completely betraying the trust I'd placed in her throughout our marriage. Her outrage only confirmed what I already suspected. She had absolutely no respect for me anymore. Then I turned to Jane. She stood there, looking utterly embarrassed, clearly avoiding my gaze, her guilt palpable. It shattered my heart to see her like that. She had always been my little girl, the one person I believed I could always count on. I directly asked her why she had been meeting with George. I watched her hesitate, glancing back and forth between me and her mother, and I noticed Mia subtly shaking her head, silently signaling Jane to keep quiet. That only fueled my determination to hear the truth. I told Jane how profoundly hurt I was to see her with this man, the very individual who had been dismantling my marriage behind my back. I urged her to be honest, to finally tell me what had truly been going on. That's when Jane finally broke her silence, revealing everything. She told me she'd known Uncle George, the man Mia was sleeping with, for a very long time, and that he was a good man. I froze. Her words implied a deep familiarity. I pressed her. When exactly had she first met Uncle George? She looked at me, paused, then finally admitted her mother had introduced him to her when she was 18. My eyes widened in disbelief. This meant Mia had been having an affair with George for at least 6 years, possibly even longer. All this time, while I was working myself to the bone, making endless sacrifices for our family, Mia had been carrying on this secret relationship right under my nose. The betrayal wasn't recent. It had been festering for years, growing in the shadows while I remained completely oblivious. I felt a tumultuous mix of shock, anger, and profound heartbreak. It was as if the life I thought I knew was nothing but an elaborate lie. I couldn't comprehend that Jane had been aware of this for so long and said nothing. The realization that my own family, the people I loved most, had been keeping this devastating secret from me for years was almost unbearable. Jane attempted to justify her complicity, explaining that when she first discovered her mother with George, she was just as furious as I was. She claimed that initially it was incredibly difficult to accept her mother's actions, but over time, her perspective shifted. She convinced herself that the happier George made Mia, the better it was to remain silent. According to Jane, she didn't want to be the one to break up our marriage, as if her silence was somehow protecting our family. Mia, on the other hand, displayed no semblance of remorse. Instead, she aggressively argued that the duration of the affair was irrelevant. All that mattered now, she asserted, was that she was divorcing me and leaving for good. She even tried to rationalize her deception by claiming she had only stayed with me for Jane's sake, and now that Jane was an adult, she no longer had to feign love for me. I was utterly incredulous. I scoffed at Mia's flimsy justification, pointing out that Jane had turned 18 5 years ago. If Mia had genuinely stayed only for Jane, she could have left then. Why wait 5 more years to finally demand a divorce? The answer was agonizingly clear. Mia wanted to ensure George was fully committed, financially and emotionally, before she made her move. She was hedging her bets, leveraging me for financial support while securing George as a guaranteed future. Mia didn't even try to argue. She knew I was right. I then turned to Jane, informing her that while her mother bore primary responsibility for this mess, I blamed her too for being such a profound coward. She could have revealed the truth at any point over those 5 years, yet she chose to align herself with her mother. I accused her of loving Mia more than me, despite Mia clearly being an unfit parent. I was the one who went to work every single day, sacrificing my time, energy, and health to loyally provide for our family for all those years, while Mia enjoyed a comfortable life and carried on her affair behind my back. I reminded Jane that I had given up my entire life savings to help her buy her dream house. Yet, she took my money without a second thought, fully aware of the deception and betrayal unfolding behind the scenes. Jane began to apologize, her voice trembling, but I was too consumed by anger and hurt to listen. The suffocating weight of the betrayal was too much. I couldn't bear to be in that house another moment, so I walked out, leaving them both. As I left, I told Mia to make sure she was gone by the time I returned. I never wanted to see her face again after what she had done. I have to admit, I felt utterly used at that moment. I had forfeited my financial security for my daughter, while she and her mother had simply been exploiting me. When I came home later that night, both Jane and Mia were gone. Fast forward to the finalization of our divorce. Mia, who had fought tooth and nail for alimony, lost her case. The overwhelming evidence I'd collected, the affair, the lies, was undeniable and worked decisively in my favor. Since Jane was already an adult, I wasn't liable for child support. I walked away from the divorce without owing Mia a single dime, which absolutely infuriated her. She was livid, accusing me of abandoning her without any financial security, claiming it was her right to receive support from me, since she had supposedly dedicated her entire life to our home and feeding me over the years. As for Jane, she had ceased all contact with me after my confrontation about her mother's affair. She had clearly taken her mother's side throughout the divorce, making no effort to reach out or apologize. I had decided to give her space, hoping that over time she would come around. However, after Mia and my divorce were finalized, Jane sent me an email that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. In it, Jane expressed her profound disappointment that I hadn't given her mother anything in the divorce. She called me vindictive and implied I was somehow responsible for Mia walking away from our marriage empty-handed, as if Mia's poor choices were my fault. Jane explicitly stated her relief that her mother had found a man like George, someone who promised them a nicer and more luxurious life. Reading her words was almost surreal. She sounded like a complete stranger, no longer the daughter I had raised, but someone fully aligned with Mia and George. Jane even wrote that the past few months without me had been stress-free, stating she enjoyed being around George and going so far as to brand me a failure for not providing her and her mother with a better life. Jane concluded her email by declaring she never wanted to speak to me again. I remember just staring at that email, unable to process its crushing weight. Jane's betrayal was more stunning than anything Mia had done. My own daughter, someone I had loved, supported, and sacrificed so much for, had completely turned her back on me. She had chosen her mother's deception and George's money over me. It felt as though I had been erased from her life, as if all those years of devotion meant absolutely nothing. It has taken me many months of therapy to find closure and genuinely move forward with my life. I've shed countless tears and experienced profound lows, But thankfully, my friends and family have been unwavering pillars of support. After receiving that email, I maintained no contact with my daughter, and I've worked hard to stop missing her. I feel I've made significant progress, which is why, when my daughter showed up at my door yesterday, completely out of the blue, I was genuinely taken aback. She looked disheveled, her eyes puffy and red. Clearly, she'd been crying. She asked if she could come in and talk. I hesitated. After everything that had transpired, I wasn't exactly comfortable letting her in. Yet a part of me, still a father, worried about her safety and wanted to hear her out before making any decisions. So I stepped aside and invited her inside. We sat down and I asked her, plainly and simply, what she was doing at my doorstep after all this time. That's when Jane began to speak, her voice initially shaky. But soon she admitted I'd been right all along, that she'd been foolish not to recognize the truth. She called her mother the devil, as she explained that after my divorce from Mia, her own life had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. Mia and George had moved in together, planning their wedding, but things were far from the rosy picture Jane had once imagined. It turned out George had children from previous marriages, and Mia was now bending over backward, trying to win them over. Jane told me how her mother barely acknowledged her existence once the stepchildren entered the picture. Mia had become completely consumed with pleasing George's kids, doing everything imaginable to be accepted by them. Jane described how her mother had emotionally abandoned her, spending no time with her and making it brutally clear where her priorities lay. George's kids, Jane explained, disliked her intensely. They were openly unpleasant and made her feel utterly unwelcome. Jane recounted multiple occasions where George hosted dinner parties, inviting all his children except her, conveniently leaving her out. She felt completely rejected by the very people she'd once believed would become her new family. When Jane confronted Mia about the blatant favoritism, Mia simply brushed her off, stating that George's kids deserved love and attention because they were still kids, unlike Jane, even going so far as to scold Jane for being so needy. At this point, Jane was in tears. She confessed she had used some of the money I had given her, the same life savings I'd sacrificed, to help her mother whenever she could. Jane had bought gifts for Mia and for George's stepchildren, desperately hoping to gain their approval and maintain relevance in her mother's life. But now that the money had dried up, Mia's true colors had emerged. With nothing left to give, Mia had cast her aside as if she were nothing. Jane finally realized Mia didn't truly care about her. She only cared about what she could extract from her. Jane told me how, over the past year, she had come to understand that everything I had warned her about a year prior was absolutely true. Her mother was selfish, manipulative, and solely driven by money. Mia had no qualms about using everyone around her, me, Jane, and now George, for her own personal gain. Once people outlived their usefulness, she simply moved on without a second thought. I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for Jane as she sat there, pouring out her heart, finally confronting the harsh reality of her choices. She had been incredibly foolish, and it had taken her this long to learn that painful lesson. Yet, despite the sympathy I felt, I also knew, deep down, that things could never revert to how they once were. The trust between us had been irrevocably shattered. When Jane, through tears, asked if I could simply let go of the past, forgive her for everything, and start over, something inside me snapped. I laughed in her face, out of sheer disbelief. The sheer audacity of it all, after everything she and her mother had put me through. I shook my head, still half amused by the absurdity of her request, and told her the blunt truth. There was no forgetting what had happened. I couldn't just erase years of betrayal and pretense as if they'd never existed. I reminded her how she had kept her mother's affair a secret from me for years, all while readily accepting my money for her own benefit, feigning that everything was fine. That was not something I could ever forgive. I told her point blank that in that regard, she was truly her mother's daughter, manipulative and self-serving. She had inherited that despicable trait from Mia, and I wasn't about to let her waltz back into my life, pretending none of it had occurred. I made it unequivocally clear she had chosen her side during the divorce. When the dust settled, she had stood firmly by Mia and George, and now she would have to live with the profound consequences of that decision. I told her, flat out, that I had no loyalty left for her. I had spent years sacrificing for her, only to have her betray me so completely. That trust was gone, and there was no rebuilding it. Jane tried to argue, likely hoping to appeal to whatever paternal instinct might still linger within me. But I wouldn't budge. At the end of the day, she was an adult, and she needed to learn to solve her own problems. Running to me for help only when things went sour with Mia and George wasn't going to work. I had made peace with her choice to abandon me for them, and now she would have to face the fallout. I quickly shut her down and asked her to leave my place. I didn't want to hear another word about her issues with Mia or George. Frankly, I didn't care. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. Ever since that day, my daughter's words have echoed in my head, and I'll admit, a sliver of guilt lingers about kicking her out without offering aid. However, I'm relieved that the general consensus among those I've shared this with agrees I am not at fault for refusing to help my adult daughter after such profound betrayal. I'm sure Jane was aware of George's stepchildren, perhaps reassuring herself that things would eventually work out. But now, feeling isolated and completely betrayed, she's turned to me, assuming I might take her in since both her mother and George have essentially abandoned her. Well, I have no intention of doing so. She needs to learn to live independently without her mommy or daddy bailing her out. And for those asking, no, I won't ask my daughter to return the money I gave her for her house. Yes, it was my life savings, but at the time, I loved her and genuinely wanted to do something significant for her. That will stand as the last gift I ever gave her, and I don't want the money back. I have a well-compensated job, and since my ex-wife is no longer a financial drain, I've managed to save up quite a bit. Update 2. It's been almost a month since my last update, and my daughter, unable to reach me, decided to contact my parents for help. My mother called to tell me Jane had complained to them about Mia and her stepdad, even calling me heartless for refusing to help and accept her after her tearful appearance at my door. What truly surprised me was that Jane had never been close to my parents before the divorce. She rarely enjoyed spending time with her grandparents. Yet now, she'd suddenly turned to them. My mother asked if she and my dad could do anything for Jane, but I firmly told her not to entertain Jane's calls any further. I reassured her I would handle the situation myself. After this, I texted Jane, asking her to meet me for coffee, and she immediately agreed. When I met my daughter, I told her she had no right to reach out to my parents behind my back. Jane tried to argue, claiming she just missed having a family and felt lonely and miserable. I raised my voice, telling her I knew exactly how she felt because I had experienced that very same loneliness when she and her mother walked out on me after the divorce. I reminded her she had even sent me an email calling me a failure, only to show up a year later on my doorstep, begging for my help. I told her I was sick of her manipulation and that she was testing my patience. Jane attempted to argue further, but I warned her that if she contacted my parents again, I would get a restraining order against her. My parents were elderly and didn't deserve this kind of drama in their lives. I made it crystal clear that if she truly desperately wanted a relationship with us, she needed to start paying me back the money I had given her. Hearing this, Jane argued it was impossible and that she could never repay me. I scoffed and said, exactly, you can't, which is precisely why you need to stay as far away from me and my family as possible. Since my conversation with Jane, I also left a voicemail for Mia, informing her of everything. I asked her to speak to our daughter so she would stop bothering me and my family, otherwise I would be forced to seek legal help. I'm truly hoping that after this, Jane finally leaves us alone. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update, and because many have asked in my DMs, I want to clarify. Jane has not bothered my family again. After I sent the voicemail to Mia, she called me back to discuss everything, and genuinely seemed surprised that Jane had reached out to us for help. My ex vehemently denied everything Jane had told me, instead offering a starkly different version of events. According to Mia, Jane was the one having difficulty blending in with the new family and had been quite rude to the stepchildren. Mia claimed that she and George had tried their utmost, but Jane simply refused to accept their family. She also clarified that everyone in their family buys gifts for each other, and Jane had done so once, but no one had ever pressured her to buy gifts for anyone. Mia expressed genuine confusion as to why Jane had lied to me about so many things. Honestly, I didn't know who to believe, so I simply told Mia that I truly didn't care what transpired between them. I only wanted Jane to stay out of my life, and that was it. Mia assured me that Jane would never bother me again, and I suppose she kept her word because Jane has not been in touch with me or my parents since. Last month, for the first time in my entire life, I embarked on a solo vacation. I was incredibly nervous at first, but then I thoroughly enjoyed meeting new people and immersing myself in a different culture. Life is good, and I have absolutely no complaints at the moment. Thanks for watching.